Welcome into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. He is Tyler Calvaruso. We're going to get into a lot on Penn State recruiting to cap off this week of coverage at Lions247.com. The first large recruiting event on deck for Matt Campbell and his coaching staff. A lot of targets going to be on campus this weekend for a junior day. We're going to break down a lot of the names that you need to know. There are a few former Penn State commits who left the class after a coaching change that are now maybe looking at circling back. Tyler Calvaruso will give us the latest on how close Penn State may be to building out its 2027 recruiting class. And of course, the transfer portal, just when we think we might be done with that conversation, we spent about an hour on that subject earlier this week on a podcast episode alongside Daniel and Tyler Calvaruso. We're not quite done yet. One of those positions we talked about has been addressed in the transfer portal, and another position that we talked about still having some need to reinforce before 2026 season has been addressed via the 2026 recruiting class. We're going to talk about those two pickups to start off the show. But to begin, Tyler, welcome back on board. And I think a lot of people have been excited to finally get back into a positive framed discussion on Penn State recruiting. And I think we're going to serve one up today.
Can tell you, I'm definitely happy to be back in a more positive delivery. I feel like I've been like the Grim Reaper over here leading into Matt Campbell's arrival in State College. It's been good. It's been busy, but it's been a lot of impactful additions for Penn State in the portal. You've seen some impactful additions in the high school recruiting ranks as well. That has continued in 2026. Now the goal is to hit the ground running in 2027. The staff's expounding a lot of energy into making that happen. And it all kicks off this weekend, first junior day of the Matt Campbell era. It's a little bit different of an approach than I believe a lot of Penn State fans are probably used to from the previous coaching staff, which we will get into, but it's going to be a good weekend for Penn State in terms of expected quality of visitor.
We will talk about that approach for Matt Campbell, and we'll talk about those names to know. But let's begin with an addition to the transfer portal class. And you, Daniel, and myself were breaking down positional perspective toward the end of the last podcast. We covered some groups that looked really good, pretty much looked good to go for the 2026 season coming out of the transfer portal window. And then we talked about a few that maybe there's room for more. Maybe there's room to supplement things a little bit, help that depth, help your outlook for the 2026 campaign. And quarterback was an area that we noted for that. Now, you do have your QB1, Rocco Becht. He was a starting quarterback the last 3 years for Iowa State under this coaching staff. A lot of familiarity there. You feel good about him as your plug-and-play starter at the position. Alex Mansky also makes the trip from Ames, Iowa, as a redshirt freshman, a guy they were really high on as a developmental piece behind Becht. That process now continues, except now they're both in Penn State uniforms. Additionally, a couple freshmen joined the roster about a week or so ago, guys who graduated high school, got here early. Case Evans, who was a former Iowa State signee, makes the move from Texas. And then in-state standout Peyton Falzone, who had a bit of a whirlwind journey on the recruiting trail, circles back to Penn State. He is here now as well. And now there's a fifth new quarterback to discuss, Connor Berry, a Division III All-American in 2025, someone who is down to his final year of eligibility and someone who knows full well that Rocco Becht is Penn State's starting quarterback. So we have a few different dynamics to break down here, but let's begin with his path to this point where Connor Berry is in a position to make the jump from Division III to Happy Valley. Tyler, talk us through it. You've been on top of this coverage. You broke his commitment to the transfer portal class last night, and you also last week had a story out there with a bunch of quotes from Barry about why this was an opportunity that really intrigued him.
Started his college career at Appalachian State, so this isn't his first taste of Division I football. Wound up leaving, transferred to D3 Christopher Newport in his home state of Virginia, went on to enjoy a pretty prolific career. And Penn State was transparent with him from the start. We're looking for someone to come in, compete for the backup job, and Barry was extremely receptive for that. I want to be clear. He had opportunities to go to FCS programs and some Group of 5 programs and start in his final year of eligibility. But Penn State is a place where he feels comfortable developing under the watch of quarterbacks coach Jake Waters. I think that although it's pretty clear, obviously you laid it out, Rocco Becht's QB1, there's no doubt about that. But he's going to have the chance to compete on the practice field day in, day out, challenge for that QB2 spot along with Alex Mansky. It's beneficial for Barry. He gets around resources, facilities, nutrition that he just has not really had. throughout his collegiate career. Obviously, I noted the start at App State, but I mean, that's still group of 5 compared to what Penn State is in the realm of college football. So it's a new level, a different kind of experience for Barry. And look, it's an opportunity that could open the door for him down the road, too, if he wants to get into coaching, going to Penn State, getting acclimated with this Matt Campbell staff. He's built up a pretty solid coaching tree. It's a place you want to be short-term and long-term for Barry. That was kind of his thought process throughout this whole thing. He's really, really excited about the opportunity. That's my takeaway in speaking to him. He's well aware of what he's going into. He's well aware of more playing time that he turned down elsewhere. So for him to come in, kind of snub some of those other opportunities where he could have been the guy for his final year of college football, I think it says a lot about what he has his sights set on.
Christopher Newport University, located in Newport News, Virginia. Interestingly enough, I was surprised. I went and viewed some of Barry's highlight film from his 2025 season, and I'm like, I recognize a ton of these colleges. In fact, a lot of those opponents were schools that I maybe had a chance to play ball at the lower level of college football. He was playing in the New Jersey Athletic Conference, playing against a lot of schools up in the Garden State. Obviously, as I mentioned, they're in Virginia. But now you're talking about jumping not just to Big Ten competition, but before that, Connor Barry's going to get acclimated with what it's like to go against power conference defenders on a daily basis, starting this spring as he takes on the Nittany Lions defenders. And really an interesting thing here to me, you look at the production at the lower level here with Christopher Newport. He's a guy that had 18 rushing touchdowns to his credit over the course of his time there, 55 passing touchdowns, more than 5,500 passing yards. But it's really difficult, Tyler, to say, okay, there's a successful quarterback playing Division III football. He's going to make sense for our room here in State College, where we've got 5 scholarships or so to deal with. Tell me what you think this staff and what you perhaps have seen from Barry on those Division III fields that you think translates here. And I'll note, he's not necessarily some physical specimen. I think 6'1", 205 pounds is what he was listed on Christopher Newport University's roster in 2025. So what are the traits you see that made sense for Penn State to get proactive here?
What's between the ears is probably the most important aspect of this entire thing. Because look, if you're not a high-level processor of opposing defenses at the Division III level, it's going to be really difficult for you to come in and get acclimated with reading D1 defenses and processing, going through reads, all that kind of stuff. Barry's very strong between the ears. He's got a high football IQ. He's shown a consistent ability to pick apart opposing defenses at the Division III level. It's going to be a little tougher for him on the practice field at Penn State. But again, it's something that he's shown that he can do. And look, Penn State, the new staff, they love Alex Mansky coming in. We've touched on it. He's the heir apparent to Rocco Becht as Penn State's starting quarterback once Becht's career in State College comes to an end. With that being said, he's still a young kid. He didn't get a ton of game experience during his first season at Iowa State. Barry gives you a different kind of look. Let's say Becht goes down, not even necessarily for a game, for a series or two. You need someone to step in, run your offense, complete a pass or two until he's back on the field. Mansky, that's not something that would necessarily overwhelm him, but where is his level of comfort compared to a more experienced player like Mansky or like Barry? Because look, we've seen Penn State in the past where Sean Clifford went down and it went off the rails for the Nittany Lions, talking about that Iowa game back in the day. So Penn State fans are well familiar with this story. Yeah, that's not to say Mansky's not ready to be QB2 in 2026. That's going to be a battle that plays out now because Barry is going to be enrolled and get started. He's going to be around for spring ball. That was something that was a little bit up in the air originally, but it got all squared away on the academic front. Barry is going to start class Monday. That's the expectation. So it's going to be a busy weekend for him moving in, especially with this snowstorm coming in. But I think it's beneficial for Mansky as well because, look, no slight at Case Evans or Peyton Falzone, but there's a difference between competing with 2 true freshmen for the QB2 spot and a veteran who has produced on the collegiate level. Not the Division I level, but still the collegiate level where it's a more advanced game. So that's where I view the value in this personally. I believe that's where the Penn State staff viewed the value in this as well. But when it came to an evaluation, it started with the in-between-the-ear stuff. And you look at the arm talent as well because not everyone's arm is going to translate to the Power 4 Division I level, but Barry's does. There's no doubt about that.
I mentioned the passing stats. I think 55 touchdowns is what I said, 10 interceptions to go with them. So smart with the football as well during his career. Someone brought this up on our message board last week when you wrote the initial story about Barry making the visit and having that reciprocated interest with Penn State. And I figured I'd bring it here to the podcast because I think it's a really relevant point. Here's someone who does have kind of a cup of coffee at the Division I level with App State. Then he spends 3 years at Christopher Newport playing Division III football. It's not a glamorous lifestyle. Now he's near the end of his college football career. I'd imagine there were other Division I opportunities, perhaps some that offered maybe more of a clear path toward competition as a QB1 here in 2026. And yet this was his decision. How much of this is maybe about a guy who knows his playing career is almost done, perhaps wants to pursue the avenue of coaching and realizes that spending a full year on a campus like Penn State, working with this staff on a daily basis, can maybe open some doors for him in the networking department, moving beyond his time as a quarterback?
Well, I think that was definitely part of the equation. I think that was part of the calculus when it came time for him to weigh his options and say, hey, look, do I want to go play FCS, start my final year, or do I want to go to Penn State where Matt Campbell, like I said earlier, has built a pretty strong coaching tree. You accumulate some pretty, I think, some pretty significant Charlie, stop.
Charlie's a big Connor Barry fan.
Yeah,
he has some things to say. Yeah.
Oh my God. But no, he gets to accumulate, I think, some pretty significant connections, and that'll help him on the next chapter. Because look, there's only so long you could play, right? Connor Barry is very well aware of that, and he knows that this Penn State staff could help him in that next step of his football journey. And look, in talking to Barry, some of the FCS programs that were in the mix, Mercyhurst, Marist, New Hampshire, he had conversations with them about starting this season. So he was going to be a guy in 2026 for these programs if that's where he chose to go. He's going to be at Penn State and be part of this quarterback room. And look, we've seen guys who are part of this Penn State roster, part of the quarterback room. They play a year or two in state college. They go on to enjoy coaching careers in the recruiting staff, personnel department. So there are a lot of different routes that you can take this kind of thing if you're Connor Barry. There are a couple different ways you can parlay your 1 year at Penn State into a lengthy career, maybe not necessarily at Penn State, but just in the college coaching ranks. So that was definitely part of the equation for Barry. In my conversations with him and asking around, it's definitely something that factored in, or at the bare minimum, weighed on the back of his mind.
What cracks me up here is that you say Charlie is pretty quiet throughout the rest of the day, but when we sit down to record a podcast, he steps up to the microphone and has some things to add.
Yeah, he's very opinionated.
The joys of a dog owner, as you became fairly recently.
Yeah.
Tyler, I just want to kind of bring the reset to the table here on our podcast for our listeners. During the last month at quarterback, Penn State says goodbye to Drew Aller, Ethan Grunkemeyer, Jackson Smolik, Beckham Kritza. Aller, of course, working toward the NFL. Ethan Grunkemeyer now at Virginia Tech with James Franklin. Jackson Smolik's at Temple. Beckham Kritza is still exploring his options as a redshirt freshman. Meanwhile, over that same span of time, Penn State adds Rocco Becht and Alex Mansky from the 2025 Iowa State roster. They add Case Evans from the 2026 Iowa State class. They get a late signing day addition with Peyton Falzone, an in-state quarterback from the high school level. And now you add Connor Barry. Complete room reset, not to mention the fact that you're transitioning from position coach Danny O'Brien, now at Virginia Tech, to Jake Waters, who was at Iowa State with Matt Campbell. And so really a lot to wrap our head around this quarterback group. Long before we get to see them throw any passes, we've got a lot to sort through in that situation. And Tyler, good coverage with Connor Barry. Anything else to add on what Matt Campbell, the front office, and this coaching staff, in your opinion, have maybe accomplished at quarterback? We figured there would be some change. I don't think anyone was really surprised to see Ethan Grunkemeyer make his move to the exit door, considering we anticipated Rocco Becht would be here. But this is a full-scale change from position 1 through position 5 for this quarterback room.
I think it was a good way to go about a retool. You bring in 2 quarterbacks in Becht and Mansky who know your system, they know the expectations, and they have good relationships with the staff, so that can aid them in their success, both short-term in Becht's case and short and long-term in Mansky's case. You bring in two true freshmen in Evans and Falzone who have upside, might not be guys for you in 2026, but you file them away. You get to work with them behind the scenes, and you really hammer home that developmental aspect of it, which is something that Jake Waters has shown he is good at from his tenure as the quarterbacks coach at Iowa State. Then you add a veteran like Barry into the mix. So I think if there's a way to go about a retool, Penn State did a pretty nice job with it.
Tyler, let's talk recruiting now, and we got a lot of directions we can go in, but we do have an obvious place to start because Penn State added another late piece to its 2026 recruiting class, 2027, and that group and those top prospects are going to be a large part of our conversation moving forward. There are some very intriguing things happening for this coaching staff and that class right now, which is good because this is a 2027 class that was at one point the number one class in the country by 24/7 Sports Metrics, and then had zero commits to discuss in the 2027 class just a couple months later. And so, Tyler, as we focus in on recruiting, let's discuss that pickup of Elijah Reed. He's a guy that you discussed quite a bit in the last 5-6 weeks when dissecting potentials flips from that Iowa State class out of New Jersey. Reed's someone that I think you brought up before as being someone who was probably under the radar, overall underrated, and that was before he came over to Penn State. Spent last weekend on campus. Now he's officially in that 2026 class. A bunch of those dudes got here earlier this month as early enrollees. So talk us through the course of action that Penn State took from the time where Matt Campbell gets hired to the time where they lock him in and turn an Iowa State piece of the future into a piece of Penn State's upcoming seasons.
Yeah, Elijah Reeder was one of Iowa State's top signees under Campbell, one of Campbell's personal favorites. I mean, that staff just loved the upside that he brings to the table, rushing off the edge. He was the definition of a hidden gem for Iowa State in the 2026 class. We often give that group credit for the way they went about unearthing some talent at Iowa State. But I mean, Elijah Reeder is kind of a different level kind of story. I mean, this is a kid who didn't have much film out there because it seemed like he didn't know how to go about the recruiting process because he had a handful of FCS offers, but his tape wasn't widespread and he was kind of a secret in Jersey, and Iowa State was able to go out and find him. And once Matt Campbell made the jump to Penn State, it presented Reeder with the opportunity, if he wished to do so, to play his college football a little bit closer to home, because there was no doubt that Campbell wanted to bring Reeder over from the start. Like I said, if you go and you read some of the National Signing Day press conference quotes from Campbell on Elijah Reeder, it is extremely easy to figure out the high regard that he holds him in. I mean, he, like I said, one of the favorite members of that Iowa State signing class, many of which has now joined Campbell at Penn State. Reeder got his release, I believe, a week or two after Campbell became Penn State's head coach. He didn't get to visit until this past weekend because he's a basketball player at Central Regional High. He's got a really busy schedule. He actually had to miss a game to take his official visit over the weekend. He wanted to finish this senior season. That's why he's going to be a summer enrollee. He wanted to play one last year of high school basketball. Finally got him to town. And it was one of those situations where really getting him to town was all it took. This was one that was going to happen for Penn State. It was a matter of when, not if. And we have our answer on the when front now. Reeder jumped on board earlier this week as the latest member of Penn State's 2026 class. When it's all said and done, I think I'd label him as one of the highest ceiling members of that class now.
Apologies, I introduced this segment and Elijah Reeder as Elijah Reed. That's one of the pitfalls. One of the pitfalls of covering a program that has added like 50 plus new players in the last few weeks. Some of these names can go awry on us, but Elijah Reeder, coming out of New Jersey, the number 9 player in the state of New Jersey, according to 24/7 Sports, number 56 edge rusher nationally in this 2026 class out of Central Regional in Bayville, New Jersey. 6'4" plus, 210 pounds, still a bit wiry in terms of a frame right now, making his jump to Division I football. You had your commitment analysis up shortly after he announced his decision to go to Penn State. What stood out to you in your evaluation of Reeder as an edge rusher, as a developing prospect?
Long, athletic, quick first step. He's still really raw. He reminds me of Chaz Coleman to some degree, maybe not to the exact degree that Coleman popped off, but
Tyler,
Reeder,
be careful. That's quite a compare. And I've seen other people make it, but Chaz Coleman was the second coming of Abdul Carter or Micah Parsons about 5 months ago. So just be careful.
I know. It's a fine line to walk, but I think if you go back and you read the commit analysis for when Chaz Coleman pledged to the Nittany Lions during his official visit, and you compare it to Reeder, a lot of the traits that we loved about Coleman and obviously have made him what he is in terms of upside and projection and ranking. Reeder has some of those, I think, to a little bit lesser of a level in terms of refinement. Coleman was raw coming out of high school in Ohio. Reeder is probably even more raw, so it's probably going to take a little bit more work. I think he still has to get stronger in the upper body because, again, like I said, basketball player, he hasn't packed on a ton of weight just yet. He'll get there, but it's going to have to go in Penn State, probably going to take a little bit. But if you look at that that first step coming off the edge, it's something you can't teach. So as he adds the weight and as he goes about developing his pass rush tool set, he's got the ceiling to be a high-level impact pass rusher for you for, I think, several years as an upperclassman. It's just a matter of him adding the weight where it needs to be added, getting stronger, and putting it all together. I'm not sure I would, if I'm a Penn State fan and we hear all these Chaz Coleman comps tossed around, I don't think I would expect Reeder to burst onto the scene in the manner that Chaz Coleman burst onto the scene in year one, but I wouldn't rule it out for year two. I think he could hit the ground running once he gets to Penn State, really hit that weight room hard, improve where he needs to improve, and be a guy for the Nittany Lions.
And let's remember, yes, Matt Campbell's at the top of the totem pole. Some of these positions, you got guys like Rocco Becht walking into very familiar settings. Same quarterbacks coach he had at Iowa State. Same offensive coordinator he had at Iowa State. Same receivers, tight ends he had at Iowa State. There's a lot that feels familiar. You've got Reeder and some of these other Iowa State commits going into positions where it's going to feel a little bit different than that. Reeder was recruited by Iowa State. He knows a lot of the guys in that facility, but the two guys who are leading the way in that defensive line room as coaches, one was at Northwestern last year and the other was at UCLA. So there will be a little bit of a feeling out, I'd imagine, between Reeder and this staff. That's going to go for a lot of the guys. And this is a position, Tyler, at defensive end that we've discussed quite a bit. And just because they had Reeder, I don't think they solved the issue because this is not a short-term solution. This is a long-term solution for you at defensive end, I think, in adding the freshman. But you look around this room, and outside of Yvonne Kamaju, not a lot of guys have done much in a Nittany Lions uniform. We think the world of Max Granville, but he's coming off a serious injury that prevented him from playing as a redshirt freshman. That's going to change, we think, here in 2026. We'll have a chance to get back on the field, make an impact. Alex McPherson is a guy that I think people around the program and us are relatively high on coming out of Colorado, but he had, a relatively limited sample size as a freshman, doesn't have a long track record at this level. And so I still think, Tyler, this is an area where if there is more help to be gained from the transfer portal, and I know it's closed, but the guys who are in there, this is still an area where I could see the current Penn State staff, as they get in the spring ball, maybe gain a feel for who has it, who doesn't right now at defensive end, for them to make some kind of concerted effort to shore things up on that 2 deep.
I could see it. It's just a matter of the pieces that are out there in the portal now, because everyone has to remember there's no more spring window. So you can't go out following spring practice and add a guy like Penn State did with Amari Campbell at linebacker last year. Your portal window, it's over. That's it. The spring is out. And that, I don't want to say hinders your ability to fill needs where you have to, it kind of does in a sense. But at the same time, there's still guys out there. Now it's a matter of evaluating those guys and figuring out if they can be something for you, because you might need help at defensive end, yeah, but you're not just going to go out and add guys for bodies. I know Penn State was at a point where it definitely needed to go out and get some bodies just in terms of roster numbers and all that, but they're not at that point anymore. If you're going to go out and add this late in the game in the transfer portal ranks, you want it to be as quality of an addition as you could possibly dig up. And I'm not saying that guy's not out there, but it's probably a more nuanced process at this point, because one, you've got guys on campus now, so everyone's getting comfortable in D'Anton Lynn's defense. They're getting comfortable with like Malloy and Christian Smith in the D-line room. So there's that element of it as well. Guys are building chemistry. Like I said, they're getting settled in. When you add to that, if you're going to add to that later on, how does that shake things up? How does that alter things? So like I said, I think there's more nuance to it now going out and adding late. This is the drawback of not having a spring portal window. So we'll see what the staff winds up doing. I will say I haven't heard of any names right now at the position that could be standing out as potential additions in the portal, but I think it's something that group is looking at.
Maybe the best thing we could hear is guys standing out on campus right now, because
Probably.
you talk about bodies. I mean, these guys are just bodies here right now. I can't tell you what Mason Robinson is. He's a redshirt junior who has played essentially no game action. He's been banged up. That's to no fault of his own, but we just don't know what he is right now. Jordan Mayer's a guy who came in from Wisconsin a couple of years ago, put on some weight. I thought he flashed a bit on the practice field, some spring games, late in blowouts at defensive end, but he missed the entire 2025 season with an injury. We don't know what he's about. And then Deshaun Burnett, when you look at the young group, which was really depleted by the transfer portal, guys like Malachi Williams, Cortez Harris, Daniel Jennings, Chaz Coleman hitting the portal, moving on. He is that one young piece that I'm very compelled by, and I think could take a big leap in year two in Lynn's defensive approach here. Deshaun Burnett is kind of a maybe tweener at linebacker, defensive end. Where is he now in year two on campus? And then Caleb Bacon, we've mentioned in the past, he's someone who brings some edge rusher pedigree at the linebacker spot, could contribute there a little bit, still looking like a second level defender. But Tyler, I unless you think McPherson goes from, a backup at Colorado who does some nice things to someone who can handle 40 plus snaps a game for you across from Yvonne Kamaju at defensive end in 2026, it's going to have to be some of this homegrown talent stepping up. And you can't count on a guy like Reeder to show up as a freshman who gets to campus after spring ball and say, I'm ready to stake my claim to a job. I know Chaz Coleman did it last year, but that is very, very unique circumstance. And so still some things to sort through there. I agree with you. You don't just take anybody, but in my mind, that's probably at the very top of the wish list for Penn State, at least from the outside looking in, an area where if you want to shore things up, it could go a long way. I would say defensive end. But we'll leave it there for now. We talked a lot about that position and some of the transfer portal movement last episode, I should say. When looking at the 2027 class now, Tyler, this is a high potential group. A lot of the names that are in the region still have interest in Penn State, despite maybe moving on from Penn State in some significant ways after James Franklin was fired. A few of these guys decommitted from the program. Kemon Spell is at the top of that list when you look at rankings. The number one running back in the country for the 2027 class, an in-state standout, made an early commitment to the Nittany Lions to join the likes of Miles Sanders, Saquon Barkley, Journey Brown, Nick Singleton as in-state running backs to stay home, wear the Nittany Lions uniform, have success here in State College. Things went a little bit awry, though. When James Franklin is fired, he opens his recruitment. He's got everyone in the country essentially saying, hey, come on, why don't you give us a look? And yet here he is heading back to Happy Valley, and it seems like momentum is suddenly back on the side of Penn State with a new coaching staff.
This definitely seems like Penn State has built up its fair share of momentum in this recruitment. It's one that feels like a Penn State-Georgia battle at this point. Notre Dame's in the mix, Miami's in the mix, but it really does feel like a Penn State-Georgia battle. That's the two programs Spell is planning on checking out. He's going to be at Penn State on Saturday. He's going to be at Georgia next weekend. And look, this staff has done – we'll get into this. Spell's not the only one. They've done a pretty good job of making up ground with some of these in-state kids in a relatively short period of time. I mean, the staff hit the road starting late last week, and they have been very intentional with the guys that they have gotten out to see. And Spell, I mean, right off the bat – Terry Smith and Matt Campbell were working in Western Pennsylvania last Thursday. Spell was a stop. Khalil Taylor was a stop. All of these top Western Pennsylvania guys, the guys who were part of Penn State's 2027 class once upon a time, have been top priorities. And look, let's call it how it is. We didn't know how this new staff, we didn't know how Matt Campbell was going to be received, because it could have went very well, as it has for Penn State so far. It also could have went very poorly, because not everyone's personality is going to align with the recruit's personality and what they're looking for in a head coach. That's something where James Franklin happened to align with a lot of these guys personality-wise, and that's why Penn State was able to go out and get some of these guys so early in the 2027 cycle. And Matt Campbell has been able to pick things back up in a similar manner. A different manner, because Gabe Jenkins laid it out pretty well in an interview with Brian Doan over the weekend. It's a different feeling, but it's still a good feeling at Penn State. And keeping Terry Smith around has helped with a lot of these guys, especially Spell, because they have a long-standing relationship. I mean, Terry Smith was the one that offered Spell in May before the commitment that he offered before the beginning of the sophomore season in August. So Smith has been in this from the start with Kemon Spell. His presence has been important. And one thing that I've heard that really interests me with Kemon Spell is Savon Huggins' presence, new Penn State's running backs coach, who has come in. He has made his presence felt on the trail by all accounts. One thing that has stood out to Kemon Spell when it comes to Huggins is it wasn't too long ago. Well, I mean, it is a long time ago now, but Savon Huggins was once upon a time in Kemon Spell's spot as a blue chip recruit. He's been through this. Now, it was different because Spell's in the NIL era and Huggins wasn't. So there's a different layer to this whole ball game. But Huggins is younger, he's relatable, and he's been there. That's something that has appealed to Spell. And Campbell himself, I mean, I can't harp on this enough with Spell and the other guys. He has taken this upon himself to put Penn State right back in the mix. And that's why the Nittany Lions have accumulated any sort of momentum heading into this weekend slate. And look, this staff is going to push while Kemon Spell is on campus. They want to lock him down. They want him to be part of this recruiting class. They want him to be the face of the future in the backfield. That's just the way it is. That's the kind of player Kemon Spell is. I'm not sure there's necessarily a must-get recruit in today's landscape, just given the way everything is with the portal and the frequent overturn on the roster front year in and year out. But Kemon Spell is as close as it gets, especially for Penn State. In-state kid, number one running back in the 2027 class. He's just a guy that you want on board as part of your program. And I said it during the week on our site because we're getting a bunch of comments about Spell, his skill set, and what he can really be at the next level. I know I haven't been doing this as long as others in the industry, but he's the best running back recruit I've seen in person with my own eyes since I saw Blake Corum his senior year at St. Francis Academy when they played in Jersey. And I wasn't even really in the industry at that point. I just went to the game because I wanted to see Corum play. And ironically, who is Kemon Spell's comparison on our end? It's Blake Corum. So, look, this kid can play. Penn State wants him, and they're going to work really, really hard as they have been to make it happen.
My takeaway, yeah, you were just so far ahead of the curve on this one, Tyler Calvaruso, with that. And I say Blake Corum, if you're wondering who's that, what did he do? He was one of the premier running backs in the country at Michigan not too long ago. Now with the Los Angeles Rams making his mark
really good
in
player.
the NFL. At Spell, not just the number one running back nationally, but the number 7 player overall out of McKeesport High School here in Pennsylvania. You think about the running backs that Penn State have added during the Franklin era. Let's start there. A lot of different blue chip talent, but the highest rated guy out of that bunch, and I believe the only one who was considered a 5-star at 24/7 Sports, was Nick Singleton. He was number 19 overall. He was the Gatorade National Player of the Year as well. You got number 7 here. If Spell were to commit to this class, and if he were to do it in relatively short order, and that happens this winter, what does that do for Matt Campbell on the recruiting trail? What does it do for him in the state of Pennsylvania? And just generally the perception of what this staff can accomplish in this cycle? Because I think a lot of people wondered, will they be playing too far from behind? Is there a chance to get these Franklin era commits back on board? And we're starting to get answers that, yes, there's a chance, and maybe more than that.
It would be a pretty big statement. It would send a very strong message. However you want to put it, it falls into that realm because I don't want to say internally this was definitely never the thought, but I mean, some people probably wrote Penn State off for some of these kids once the new staff came in, just because it's tough to get kids committed back after they're previously committed, no matter circumstance, especially after a coaching change and a complete coaching staff overhaul. Campbell has done, I think, a superb job really making these kids feel comfortable, not just with him as an individual and as a coach, but he's done a great job outlining the vision for the program moving forward. Because that's a huge selling point, right? You could like a coach all you want. That's great. You could jibe with him in however many ways you do. But if the vision for the future of the program does not line up with what you're looking for, it doesn't sound quite right to you, your level of interest is not going to be where it's at for guys like Kemon Spell, Khalil Taylor, Gabe Jenkins right now. Because, look, I mean, we're not going to get on here and act like Penn State has a chance to get every top kid in Pennsylvania just because Matt Campbell's doing a good job early on. It's not the way it goes. But with these 3 specifically, the feedback has been really, really positive. Spell, there's momentum. Khalil Taylor, they've done a good job. He's taken a Noah Pauley, wide receivers coach, really, really well. There's still work to do there because, I mean, Khalil Taylor's recruitment has turned into a who's who. He's got a lot of top-tier suitors. And with Jenkins, Campbell and Deion Broomfield and Terry Smith have done a really good job trioing up and getting him interested. Because, I mean, Gabe Jenkins has an official visit locked in already for early June. and he's high on Deion Broomfield's board at safety. They're pushing hard, and there are people in Western Pennsylvania who, as much momentum and optimism as there is surrounding Spell that has come about, I'd say, in the last 2 weeks, Jenkins is right there, man. There are some people who are very confident that he will wind up back at Penn State when it's all said and done. I think there's still plenty more that needs to go into making that happen, but there's an optimism surrounding that happening that, to be honest, it was probably at like 0% last month, just because there was so much unknown. Now Campbell has made himself a more known commodity to these kids, and that's a reason why we're having this conversation.
You mentioned Gabe Jenkins and Khalil Taylor before I could, because that's where I was going to go next. Both of them expected to be on campus with Spell. And you look at the who's who of Pennsylvania's 2027 class, these are the guys. Spell is number one on that list. Taylor, a wide receiver out of Pine Richland High School in the Pittsburgh area, is number 4 on that list. And then Gabe Jenkins, also out of the Pittsburgh area at Amani Christian Academy. He is the number 5 player in the state of Pennsylvania. He's a defensive back. Both of them are firmly inside the top 24/7. So Penn State getting all of them on campus together. New coaching staff, Terry Smith's there. We know Terry Smith and what he means to the Western PA recruiting outlook for Penn State. So how primed are you, or do you think Penn State is to have a successful weekend, particularly with this trio back on campus, guys who at one point viewed their futures as in Penn State uniforms, wearing the Nittany Lions logo, backed off that a few months ago, and now here they are back on campus. Perhaps they even didn't think they'd be circling back like this.
I think it depends on how you quantify success coming out of this weekend, right? Because there are going to be some people, and understandably so, quantify it in terms of commitments. Are Kemon Spell, Khalil Taylor, and Gabe Jenkins going to jump on board coming out of their junior day visit? I think that might be that's definitely an optimistic outlook. Is it a realistic one? I don't know, because these kids haven't made it to town yet, and we haven't gotten feedback on how things are going. I think for me, success this weekend for the Penn State staff is defined by the on-campus impression that is made, because this staff has done a good job on the road with these guys. Now you're getting them to your house. You're getting them to State College. You're getting them back around the facilities, around everything that is going to be there for them if they choose to suit up at Penn State. So now you want to sell your culture that you're building. That's something that is much easier to do when these kids are on campus than it is when you're out recruiting them on the road, whether it be at their school, in an in-home visit setting, wherever it is on the road. It's different when you're on campus, because it's just these kids can envision things. They could see what's there ahead of them. You got to be able to sell your culture. Me and you, we often talk about laying the groundwork during these junior day visits. It's a similar approach. You want to lay the groundwork for future success, and you really want to build the pillars of your relationships with these kids while they're on campus for these junior day visits, because you want to get them back during the spring. You want to get them back for official visits. And I know these are local kids, so the officials might not necessarily be as important for them as it would be for the non-region guys, but it's still important. You still want them around for that multi-day stay where they learn the ins and outs of what you were aiming to accomplish before this Penn State team even takes the field under Matt Campbell. So it's an important weekend. There are different ways to quantify success coming out of the weekend. I guess that depends on the individual. But I think right now, if you're not able to get these kids across the line while they're in town, which is not an easy thing to do, I don't care how much momentum you have, it is not easy to go out and close early in the cycle like this, especially in the NIL era, where kids are more inclined to take things further along down the line and see what they could do on that front. You really just want to build a strong foundation this weekend. Bare minimum, that should be your goal.
Who are some other names you think are worth acknowledging on this podcast? And let's go back to what you mentioned at the top of the show, how this feels like a different strategy for the Penn State staff for this junior day setup than maybe what we saw from James Franklin for the last decade.
I know I just said quantify like 10 different times, but we're going to go back to a version of that word. It's a quality over quantity approach for this new Penn State staff starting off on the junior day visit front. Like I said earlier, we've become accustomed to covering these junior days where some pretty sizable groups, right, spanning multiple recruiting classes. And this staff, they took a different approach at Iowa State. They had smaller junior days where you really were able to zone in on your top targets. And that is the approach that we're seeing this weekend with the expected group of visitors. I mean, Spell, Taylor, Jenkins are the tip of the iceberg. You got guys like Matthew Gregory, who's a top 100 in-state wide receiver coming to campus. Kyler Kuhn, a top 24/7 offensive lineman out of the Midwest. He's a top target for offensive line coach Ryan Clanton. There are so many high-level guys who are high in the pecking order for Penn State at their respective position coming into town. It allows you to dedicate a lot of energy to those guys. Now, will this be Penn State's long-term junior day approach? I don't know, because you're still new to this if you're the new Penn State staff. You know, recruiting at Iowa State is different than recruiting at Penn State. So is this the junior day approach you're going to take long-term? I don't know. They're probably going to weigh the benefits and the cons of laying out a smaller junior day weekend. But I think there's a lot of potential benefit in bringing in a smaller group. And make no mistake about it, this isn't going to be a common thing. Like, the spring is going to be big for Penn State on the recruiting trail, because one thing that this staff has laid out during the in-home visits, they want guys to come see them coach in a spring practice setting. They really, really want guys to get eyes on what they do with their players in a competitive setting. They want to see how they go about developing those players and that talent on the practice field. So the spring is going to be paramount for this Penn State staff, but that does not detract from the importance of these two upcoming junior days. It's smaller in numbers. It's not quite what we're used to. It's a different kind of approach, but I think that it's an approach that could very much work out for this staff, given the way things are trending with some of these guys.
Did a great job laying that out. But if you wouldn't mind, outside of that in-state trio that we covered, any other names you think are worth kind of just tossing out here on a podcast conversation? I know you've got our VIP subscribers covered over at lions247.com. You'll continue to do that with feedback coming out of their visits. But who are you particularly curious to get a pulse on as they go through this experience?
It sounds pretty good with Matthew Gregory right now. I think he's another one, kind of like Khalil Taylor, where he's taken really well to Noah Pauley. And speaking with several people associated with that recruitment are familiar with the process and the way things are going. Matthew Gregory always has had a feel of having a desire to stay a little bit closer to home if it's feasible for him. It was very feasible for him with the previous Penn State staff. We're getting back to that point now with the new Penn State staff. To be honest, I mean, it's early in the cycle, and I want to see how this visit goes. But he's one of those guys where I've seriously considered tossing in a crystal ball. I think it sounds pretty good for Penn State with Matthew Gregory. He's going to be back on campus over the weekend, and he's a very exciting prospect. He still has to develop as a receiver. He's kind of, I don't want to call him a track kid because he's not a track kid. He's a pretty good football player too. But his speed is what makes him an elite level prospect, a top 100 guy on the composite. And he's really exciting. He's someone that the Penn State staff is excited about. They worked hard to get him back to town. One other thing with him I want to know, Penn State right now, the only junior day visit that he has scheduled. I think that's notable. So Gregory is one. Kyler Kuhn, who I touched on, he's another big-time target for Ryan Clanton on the interior of the offensive line. We spent so much time talking about Kemon Spell. Kelvin Morrison is another in-state running back. I think Penn State fans need to chart really, really closely moving forward. He's a quieter kid, so he's kind of tough to get a read on, but this staff really likes him. Terry Smith offered during his tenure as Penn State's interim head coach. Savon Huggins reaffirmed that offer to Morrison on Monday is what I'm told. So he's a guy to keep an eye on moving forward. He'll be in town this weekend. Tommy Douglas, tight end out of New Jersey. He's the son of former New York Jets general manager, longtime NFL exec Joe Douglas. Really talented tight end prospect at the Hunt School in Princeton. And I think all Penn State fans listening to this who follow recruiting know Hunt School does a great job of producing top-level talent, getting those guys ready to play at the collegiate level. So he's a very intriguing visitor. Penn State's going to be involved there. Taylor Mauser, that's going to be one of his guys higher on the board. So keep a close eye on Tommy Douglas. The last 2027 I want to – actually, no, there are two more. I'll start in-state. Zachary Gleason from Central Catholic, coming off a really good junior season playing corner for the Western PA Power. And we've often seen situations where Terry Smith goes into a place like Central Catholic. We saw it with Xavier Thomas a few cycles ago, a guy who's maybe, quote-unquote, a little bit more under the radar than some others, but he's a really good football player. And Terry Smith's evaluations recently speak for themselves. So Gleason's one to chart. The last one now, I promise, this is actually the last one in 2027. Excuse me. Lucas Roa, California product, but He's an offensive lineman with Pennsylvania roots. He has long held the Nittany Lions in a very high opinion. This weekend's important for him. He wants to come in and get a feeling for where he is on this Penn State offensive line board. That is crucial for him. So those are the guys standing out beyond the initial trio we discussed. It's not barren in 2028 either, because you've got top 100 edge rusher George Parkinson IV out of Malvern Prep coming in as well.
Tyler, I want to circle back to one name there because I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic for Noah Pauley, who we've heard really good things about his ability to get talent at wide receiver and develop that talent at wide receiver. To have Khalil Taylor, who we have at 103 overall in our rankings at 24/7 Sports, and Matthew Gregory, who's out of Pottstown, Pennsylvania, two in-state receivers in the top 150 overall rankings. Gregory is number 21 overall wide receiver in our assessment at 24/7 Sports. Taylor, number 15. Huge opportunity there. I mean, two guys in your footprint, plenty of offers, have interest in Penn State that now sustains a couple different coaching staffs. And so I'm really going to be curious how those guys respond to their in-person interactions on campus with Pauley, with the rest of this coaching staff. What kind of impression does your offensive coordinator, Taylor Mauser, make on some of these guys? And I know I'll be able to find that out from your coverage at Lions247.com coming out of these visits. I know Brian Doan will be active in covering some things out of this as well, our national recruiting analyst within the 24/7 Sports Network. And by the way, we've got a deal going on right now. $1 for 2 months of VIP access. That's a damn good opportunity. We're calling it a test drive to get on board right now and take a look. And it'll be a really good chance to see how we cover recruiting going into the spring. And I think a lot of people who try out that quote unquote test drive will stick around long term with us. But $1 for 2 months of VIP access at Lions247.com. Sticking at receiver with you, Tyler Calvaruso, as we start to wrap up this podcast episode. Samson Gash has been a name to know for a while in the 2026 recruiting class. That group is coming up towards the traditional signing day. That'll be February 4th, I think, the first Wednesday of February. It's a day that used to be huge. It was like the Super Bowl of recruiting. And then the early period started in December, and it became an afterthought. And in fact, here at Penn State, there have been years where no one was signed on that February signing day. They would like to change that. We'll see if it is changed, but Samson Gash is a priority. He is committed to Michigan State. He has been committed to the Spartans since June. Of course, Michigan State also fired their head coach, did so later in the season. They've now added Pat Fitzgerald, longtime Northwestern coach, as their new program leader. He is still a Michigan State commit. That's how you would describe him. But how much has Penn State maybe budged him off that stance? And this is where we also have to note his father was a player for Penn State, played fullback in the NFL for a long time, Sam Gash. So there are some personal connections to Happy Valley in play here too.
Yeah, and this Penn State staff already knew Samson Gash from previous adventures on the recruiting trail, I think is the best way to put it, because they went after him, but there was a sentiment that they didn't think they could get him out of Michigan when it was all said and done. So it didn't really go as far as it could have. But now that they're at Penn State and they have those ties, I think it can really, really help the Nittany Lions. Now, that being said, I think there's still work to do because you talk to some people. Right now, I think I still lean a little bit towards him sticking with Michigan State, but that's also a pre-official visit take. That the tide really could turn while Samson Gash is on campus. This staff has picked this one up and done a really, really good job. Terry Smith has been involved as well as part of Penn State's ability to make a move on Samson Gash here down the stretch. I mean, the skill set, he plays in Penn State's offense, man. He can do everything at wide receiver that Penn State wants to accomplish in this offensive system that Taylor Mauser is going to run. And his skill set there's so much, I feel, for Noah Pauley to get out of Samson Gash. He's kind of like the ideal late cycle wide receiver target that this staff is going after. And it's a crucial weekend, no doubt about it, because it's tough when Michigan State has the final official visit, because as the tide could turn this weekend, it could go right back once Gash gets to Michigan State, gets around that new staff, and he can wind up with the Spartans when it's all said and done. I do think that's a very realistic possibility. But Penn State is going to take its swing beginning this weekend. And they've been hitting some doubles with Gash in terms of making progress. Now they're going for the home run. They want to make sure that they leave this official visit standing out in a big, big way, giving him a lot to think about going into his Michigan State official visit. And look, you hit a grand slam, maybe he's on board when it's all said and done. Maybe he doesn't even get to Michigan State for that official visit. But all indications are that he'll be in East Lansing next weekend. And so we're in a crucial stretch in the recruitment of Samson Gash. And it's going to be a decision-making process that probably goes all the way up until that February 4th date, that National Signing Day date, the one you said so nicely. It used to be everything in the world of college football recruiting. Now it's mostly nothing. But this cycle, it is definitely not nothing for Penn State, I can tell you that.
Sometimes you can find a pretty serious cherry on top of your class. Venga Ioane, the last addition to the 2022 class, he's going to potentially be a first-round pick leaving campus now at the offensive guard spot. We'll see if Samson Gash can be a similar impact pickup here late in the cycle. I think to your point, ideally, Penn State staff would love to see him say, you know what, I'm not going back to East Lansing unless I'm going back in a Penn State uniform to play against them. But even if he does follow through, make that trip, you'd love for him to do it in the back of his head thinking, can the Spartans top what I just experienced at Penn State? You want that eating away at the back of his mind a little bit. And so an opportunity to kind of set the stage with Gash on campus coming up. Tyler, you've done a great job breaking a lot of different stuff down for us. There are new offers going out. There's a bunch of coach visits that have happened across America. All that over at lions247.com for our VIP subscribers. A lot to get to on the recruiting end. We had a quarterback commit from the transfer portal. And so appreciate you taking the time to sit down with me on a Friday to break all this stuff down. And we'll see what we get coming out of the weekend. Hopefully we get these guys in and out. I got a flight to catch on Monday. We're supposed to get maybe 2 feet of snow here in State College on Sunday. So I'm wondering myself exactly what my escape route looks like from this place. But we'll see how it all plays out. You'd love to not see weather be a factor in delaying guys or getting them on campus, but it could happen. We'll keep tabs on that. If there are some updates there, Tyler Calvaruso will have our subscribers informed on it at lions247.com. For now, Tyler, really appreciate your efforts. Anything else you want to add to this conversation?
No, man, this was a lot of fun. It's the first time in a while we've been able to have an in-depth conversation about the 2027 class. So I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone out there listening enjoys it. But no, it's going to be a fun weekend, and I'm glad we get the chance to cover it.
And I'll just say this, ending on a positive note here. Remember back on signing day in December when Penn State signed only 2 guys, quarterback Peyton Falzone, defensive end Jackson Ford. 2 guys signed. They were outside of the top 120 in national rankings for classes at 24/7 Sports. Now 15 guys in that class. Gash could be a 16th edition potentially. We'll see if there's any other moving parts that could add to this group. But now number 44 ranking nationally. So you're trending in a much better direction there than with the precarious spot they were in a month or so ago. Tyler, good stuff from you as always. For him, I am Tyler Donahue. And as always, we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you over at lions247.com between now and our next episode, which will drop next week. For now, stepping aside, I'm Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.